Good morning, this is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Today we are in Lesson 16 of the Gospel of Mark, and we're covering Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 21. This one's called Give Me a Sign. Jesus performed many signs and wonders in his 3-year ministry, and these miracles displayed his compassion, his credentials, and his concern. Jesus understood the difficulties that arose from living on a sinful earth. There were so many sicknesses, diseases, and demons. None of these existed in the Garden of Eden, but entered into this world through sin. But even though man added this through sin, Jesus still had compassion for the people. Signs and wonders also displayed the credentials of Jesus. No one had done what Jesus was doing. But as we have discussed before, Satan also has used signs and wonders to convince his followers of his power. This occurred with Pharaoh's magicians and will occur with the false prophet and Antichrist when the prophecies of Revelation come to fruition. But the miracles of Jesus are accompanied by his godly word and behavior. Finally, the signs and wonders of Jesus display his concern. Jesus wants people to hear him, believe him, and follow him. This is not because his ego requires followers, but because he knows that is the only path to joy, abundant life, and love. Let's read about another miracle of Jesus in this first passage today. Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 10 says this: In those days, the multitude being very great and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said to them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now continued with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. And if I send them away hungry to their own houses, they will faint on the way, for some of them have come from afar. Then his disciples answered him, How can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? He asked them, How many loaves do you have? And they said, 7. So he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, broke them, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. And they set them before the multitude. They also had a few small fish, and having blessed them, he said to set them also before them. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. Now those who had eaten were about 4,000, and he sent them away, immediately got into the boat with his disciples, and came to the region of Dalmanutha. The feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000 are both depicted in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. But there are many people who somehow think that this is exactly the same miracle that has been discussed twice. There are so many differences, and those differences should remind us that these are 2 completely different events. First of all, the feeding of the 5,000 occurred in Israel and consisted of mostly Jewish believers. Those believers spent the day with Jesus and were in a remote location near a very small town on the Sea of Galilee. The feeding of the 4,000 occurred during the return trip of Jesus from Decapolis. So this feeding likely included many more Gentiles. In addition, we also can notice that these people might have been hungrier because they had spent 3 days with Jesus. Finally, all the numbers are different as well. After Jesus explains to his disciples about his compassion concerning their hunger, we can read this ridiculous response. How can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? What? Were you visiting Aunt Edna last weekend? All of us can be forgetful, but the disciples of Jesus are not old men with dementia or Alzheimer's. Honestly, it has not been very long since Jesus did something similar, miraculously feeding 5,000 men, and possibly as many as 25,000 people, with the women and children counted, all on 5 loaves and 2 fishes, the meager lunch of a little boy. Remember, after feeding the 5,000, after Jesus walked on the sea and joined the disciples in the boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, Mark wrote this in Mark 6:52, "For they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened." It sounds like their hearts are still hardened. I guess this comes down to the difference between head knowledge and heart knowledge. The knowledge concerning the miracles of Jesus had not made the 18-inch journey from their heads to their hearts. When we read this verse, almost everyone would be scratching their heads, not understanding how it would even be possible for the disciples to ask a question like this not so long after Jesus fed between 5,000 and 25,000 people. This also shows a complete lack of logic. For example, if a person had a flat tire and I changed that tire, and then a week later that person had another flat tire, should they wonder whether or not I have the ability to change a tire? Well, think back a week. I have to say the blindness of the disciples in this passage is a bit mind-boggling. But then we can go down a different path. Instead of looking at the failures of others in judgment, maybe we should look inside and try to remember times when we exhibited similar traits. We worship a God of miracles. And as pointed out earlier, through his miracles, God portrays his compassion, credentials, and concern. How many times has God done something miraculous in our lives, and either we do not attribute that miracle to God, we simply accept it without thankfulness, or soon down the road, we forget about God's miraculous hand in our lives. It takes a lot of repetition for stupid sheep to learn. Of course, Jesus did not let the doubt of the disciples distract him, and performed a similar miracle by taking 7 loaves and a few small fish and feeding 4,000 people. This time, there were 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. The word used for basket in this passage is much different than the word used for basket in the story of the feeding of the 5,000. In that first miracle, the baskets were very small, lunchbox sized. Where in the feeding of the 4,000, these baskets are huge. There were much more leftovers in the second miracle. Nothing in the Bible is a coincidence. Certainly, even the number of baskets remaining of food is a specific number that has a meaning. We really cannot know what that meaning is, but we can guess. One suggestion was that the 12 baskets remaining could represent 1 basket for each of the disciples. Some other Bible teachers also have suggested that as there were 12 tribes of Israel, and this miracle performed by Jesus occurred with a crowd of Jewish followers, that there was 1 basket remaining for each of the tribes of Israel. Very easily, could be both. And it also could be neither. We do not need to know the answer, but it is still interesting to think about it. Some Bible teachers take the second miracle, where there were 7 huge baskets remaining of fragments, and pertain that to the Gentile nations that once inhabited the lands of Israel: Canaanites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hittites, Hivites, Jebusites, and Perizzites. Let's read the next passage. Mark chapter 8, verses 11 through 12 says this: Then the Pharisees came out and began to dispute with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven, testing him. But he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, Why does this generation seek a sign? Assuredly, I say to you, no sign shall be given to this generation. The Pharisees did not want an earthly sign. They wanted a heavenly sign. How about fire from heaven, like Elijah? Maybe a surrender Dorothy message, handwritten in the sky, would have sufficed. Truly, it did not matter. no matter what Jesus would have done, they would not have believed. They did not want to believe. Believing would lessen their power and would decrease their self-importance. In the same manner, many modern-day celebrities do not believe in God. It is actually quite easy to understand why. Many of us understand that it is only through God's provision that we've managed to keep our heads above water. But there are other people who manage quite easily on their own, or at least seem to. Personally, I think this is part of the meaning of the verse that reminds us that it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. Certainly, there will be many godly rich people in heaven. But for those unwilling and unable to honor God with their words or deeds, they will get exactly what they have chosen. Remember, our belief does not change God. Even if all of the world did not believe in the existence of God, God would still exist. The Pharisees, who all must have been born in the show-me state of Missouri, or misery, wanted a heavenly sign from God, but only received an earthly sign. Well, Jesus was a heavenly sign that came to earth as an earthly sign. God sent his Son from heaven to walk this earth as a man, and he came directly to the Jewish people. Paul had at one time felt the same way about signs, and said this about his contemporaries in 1 Corinthians 1:22, "For Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom." But faith comes from God's word, not from God's miracles, not even from witnessing God's miracles. We know that many in the multitude who had seen the miracles of Jesus did not come to his saving knowledge of Christ. Let's read the final passage. Mark chapter 8, verses 13 through 21 says this, "And he left them, and getting into the boat again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, and they did not have more than one loaf with them in the boat. Then he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, and the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, It is because we have no bread. But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to him, 12. Also, when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said, 7. So he said to them, How is it you do not understand? Jesus makes a statement in which he addresses a problem that he can see in his disciples. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees. In other Gospels, when the Pharisees request a sign, Jesus says that the only sign they will receive is the one of Jonah, just as Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish. Jesus will spend 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. The disciples question Jesus concerning why he is being so hard on the Pharisees. This reveals a cultural issue of that time. The Pharisees had chiseled themselves into a very powerful position among the Jewish people, and it likely was even more apparent with the Jews being under the rule of the Romans. We can see that the Pharisees were not just the religious leadership, but they also were respected and revered, regardless of their false doctrine. That is what Jesus was addressing with this statement. Leaven points to pride, and at the same time, it also points to sin, hypocrisy, and false doctrine. Galatians chapter 5, verses 1 through 9 says this, Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Indeed, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, Christ will profit you nothing. And I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised that he is a debtor to keep the whole law. You have become estranged from Christ, you who attempt to be justified by law. You have fallen from grace. For we, through the Spirit, eagerly wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Christ Jesus neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith working through love. You ran well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion does not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump. The disciples had not understood the miracle of Jesus feeding the 5,000, had not understood the miracle of the feeding of the 4,000, had not understood why they were to beware the leaven of the Pharisees, had not understood that Jesus would soon be crucified and resurrected. Once again, here is yet another example of man's limited intellect and understanding. The disciples were not rocket scientists. Neither are we. But even if we were, it would be more likely we would emphasize our own intellect above God. A good prayer is for God to keep us humble, for us to know what he wants us to know, to keep us moving in the right direction. Perhaps we need a sign. This is Garry Glaub in Mooresville, North Carolina. Have a blessed day.